During World War II, the soldiers were not the only ones who were affected by the war. The women, men, and children that were not on the battlefield were also fighting. Women would take over the soldiers' jobs and buy war bonds so that the economies at home could stay strong to support the troops. The most common ways to gain support was through propaganda, as most countries had their own propaganda departments. Even though they were not soldiers, many of these citizens still felt the wrath of war like never before. Due to civilian bombings, the war was not just targeting the military. Shortly after World War II, the Cold War began with Russia and the United States. The civilians were also greatly impacted because there was always a possibility that an atomic bomb would be dropped on any given city or town. So the continuous fear of bombings began in World War II and lasted until the end of the Cold War. The greatest impact that the war had on the home front was the general worsening of conditions. Women either had to leave their jobs for the men's more important jobs or had to leave their children for these jobs. Most of their jobs were in factories producing goods needed by soldiers or for weapons. In addition to changing careers, rationing was very popular. Every citizen would be forced to only have their set amount of food and supplies so that the soldiers were able to have plentiful amounts of food. Civilian bombings began in 1939 with Hitler's Blitzkrieg strategy, where they would attack with tanks and soldiers and then target non-military and also military targets with overhead bombings. Many countries use this strategy to try and lower morale and convince leaders to surrender due to high death toll of these bombings. The London bombings were the most brutal of the early civilian bombings. Bombings that lasted from fall 1940 to spring 1941 killed 30,000 innocent civilians. The most brutal of these bombings was the United States attacks on Japan. Beginning with the bombing of Tokyo on March 9th through 10th in 1945, the United States caused the death of 100,000 civilians. The continuous bombing of Japanese cities caused there to be a constant fear of atomic bombs and a very low morale in Japan. Civilian bombings killed hundreds and thousands of innocent civilians, lowering morale and instilling a permanent fear into anyone who lived through World War II. During this time, the U.S. was also very similar to Europe's society, as they also had war bonds, rationing, and women took over the soldiers' jobs. The most famous example of propaganda used by the United States to increase the number of women who were in the workforce was Rosie the Riveter. Rosie presented the image of a woman who joined the workforce so that she would be able to help support the army. Rosie soon became very popular and lots of women aspired to be as strong and brave as her.
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the riveter, keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie, the riveter. Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine. When they gave her a production knee, she was as proud as a girl could be. There's something true about red, white, and blue about Rosie, the riveter. The riveter, Rosie, 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 working on assembly line. Bubble day, bubble dee dee, leave it on that day. Reebit boy, reebit boy, reebit. Rosie, 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 the rivet.